No. For many people who used to watch my old channel, Roof Dangs, you would know that my reputation was someone who was interesting. To be fair, the opinions I had with the shows I watched was genuine, but I used a lot of sarcasm in my old videos because I thought it was funny. But now, after time has passed, and having made some major mistakes along the way, my opinions for a lot of things have changed. One of them is this: New Generation Ultraman. OMG, the show sucks. So childish. Man, this is trash. These were the words that would come out of my mouth, which could be considered truth for some things, but not really the reality. But I do remember a time when this was somewhat frequent, most notably the complaints about some of the new generation shows. I won't point fingers, but the feeling of the shows being not as good as we wanted was the feeling that I felt during the time when these shows were airing. But if you were to ask me right now, if New Generation Ultraman still sucks, I'm gonna have to say no. These days, there are less complaints about Ultraman being subpar, and I felt like the series has been uplifted and improved from the start of Ultraman Ginga to Ultraman Arc. There have been many improvements. I'll admit, I shouldn't really be the type of person to be covering this topic given my reputation, but I still want to make this video because I feel like my general thought of this new generation as a whole has changed, and I also want to say that this is all just an opinion and not an actual fact. I believe everyone has their own opinions for how they perceive things, and I just want to make this video to share my point of view of this topic, so feel free to make some comments down below. Starting from Ginga, the show that started all, it was a show that I felt was hit or miss. It wasn't a show that I personally enjoyed, mostly because of the low production and a story that I felt wasn't as great compared to the likes of Kamen Rider at that time. But given the circumstances that had affected the parent company, Subaraya Productions, at that time, it does make sense as to why the show doesn't feel as good as I personally wanted it to be. I won't go into too many details as to what happened, but yeah, a whole bunch of stuff happened. And then came Ginga S, with a higher production budget that has a bigger cast, more lore, a colorful display of transformation sequences, and a fight choreography that is almost non-stop. A big improvement overall compared to the previous show. Although it's not really one of my favorites of the franchise, it was still something to prove to us that Ultraman is a series that was beginning its biggest comeback, and I'm glad for that, because Ultraman wouldn't be where it is now if it weren't for Ginga. However, despite this revival and improvements between Ginga and Ginga S, there was now a new problem: the toys. I remember back in my day, Ultraman would transform in one button. I remember back in my day, Ultraman focused more on the story, in which, I get it, I had the same opinion as well, but doing some self-reflection and looking back on it all, if there was a possibility that I would have been considerate with the financial struggles that Subaraya had and the competition of other IPs having a bigger revenue and fan base compared to Ultraman, I probably would have understood the reason for all of these toys being incorporated into Ultraman. I get it, money is the reason for this, and the more they advertise toys, the more money they get, but I still feel like this is something that shouldn't be the main focus of this discussion. There were many things to talk about, and the toys is just one of them. The following shows after Ginga S, which is Ultraman X, Orb, Jeed, Rube, and Tiger, it begins to develop and improve on many things. Well, only if you're talking about the income, but to be very honest with the shows that I've listed, story-wise, it felt like there were many ups and downs. Some shows were better than others, some shows had better story writing, some shows had more fight scenes, some shows had more toys. My personal favorites out of the ones listed are X and Orb, mostly because I felt the story writing for the two series was more stable, as in being grounded, having character developments, and sometimes having a balance of drama and fight sequences. The other shows, however, well, I just didn't feel like they were as good, such as, for some moments, being not as memorable or able to stand out in what makes the series different from the previous, because all of them are episodic, have fight sequences, and show off their transformation devices. And that's what I felt was the main reason for my lack of interest for the other listed shows. It was more or less the same, and the pacing didn't feel like it was any different from the previous. Whereas X and Orb, I felt like there were moments that surprised me and had showcased a story that made the show more interesting. However, the other shows, Jeed, Rube, and Tiger, had moments that did stand out in the show, specifically Alien Knuckle from Tiger, the concept of having two main protagonist Ultras in Rube, and this one scene from Jeed. Yeah, that took a long time. So there were moments that did stand out from these shows, and although I personally enjoyed only 2 out of the rest, there were still moments in the other shows that did make it stand out in a way. However, after the end of Ultraman Tiger, it was the start of Ultraman Z, and I felt like from here, things began to change. Z was a show that was overall outstanding, a very well balanced show that showcases the blend of well written stories with the dreaded fusion Ultraman concept, which was something that people didn't really like as it had been done before with some of the previous Ultraman shows. I personally don't have much to say except for riding the bandwagon, as it was around this time where I started getting into Ultraman since I was a kid. So with Ultraman Z, I felt like there was a reason for the need to use the fusions, as it was a device that was used as an upgrade of the Ultra to fight berserk monsters in space. And given the situation when it was needed to be used, it proved its purpose, being a device that revived the fallen Ultra and a human, and a power-up that boosts the ability of the Ultra, which gives it a purpose as to why the transformation device and sequence was needed for the protagonists that were involved, as Z's base form alone wasn't capable enough to take out Genagag, and with the help of a fallen human, they used the new abilities to bond and power themselves up to defeat Genagag, and overall, the show was done very well. There were moments of heartbreak, drama, and character development that pushes the decisions of the characters to act on their beliefs and improve as a character in the show. Once Ultraman Z ended, I felt like there wasn't gonna be a show that could live up to the overall greatness of Z, and yeah, to be very honest with you, the next show, which is Ultraman Trigger, is not my favorite show in the new generation lineup. The biggest reason for this is because my personal expectation was set too high. It was a show that was branded as New Generation Tiga, and as many people would know, Tiga is a show that revived the Ultraman franchise in the 90s and is a cult classic among fans. So my expectation with Trigger was that it was gonna be a show that was going to be as good as Tiga, or at least as good as Z, but my expectations were set too high, and I ended up disliking the show. As you can expect, the show lacked a lot of things, mostly the character dynamics being predominantly involved between 3 people and not really giving much screen time to anyone else, and story-wise, it wasn't as great. It lacked any big threats, and even if there were any threats, they would eventually become friends with the main protagonist. Overall, it was a new generation show, but it didn't feel like Tiga. That was the main reason for my dislike of the series. After Trigger came Deca, which is New Generation Diner. It was a show that I felt had improvements from Trigger, but still had problems that didn't make the show any better, mostly because of the focus of one villain, which steals the spotlight for a lot of parts of the show, whose purpose is to seek vengeance for his planet that was destroyed. He was blaming humanity for much of his problems until his final moments, where he changes but ends up not really achieving anything, and all his efforts for vengeance just goes to waste. Although it was a moment that was different and could be something that stands out from the other shows, it still didn't feel like a show that did any better, mostly because the main character and main villain lacked purpose. The main character defeats the final enemy with ease, and the villain achieves nothing. It was a New Generation show, but still, it wasn't Diner. I guess my expectations were set too high again, but story-wise, the show isn't one of my favorites. But from here, things started to look better. Ultraman Blazer. It was a show that had a lot of hype. It began with a trailer that felt cinematic, giving us something that could showcase story writing and character that could be comparable to the previous Heisei and Showa generations. It did achieve this in retrospect, but I still felt like some things were lacking. My only complaint about this show was that it overall didn't feel like there was something that stood out, even though the stories were well written and the characters were very down to earth, but I felt like there wasn't something that made me go wow. The only exception to this is Bando taking his shirt off, but yeah, each individual story was thought out, and it did give us characters that are memorable, but I felt the show was still missing something that I felt was holding it back. Now we're caught up with Ultraman Arc, the current series airing as this video is being made. So far, it is a show that I felt has taken everything that had worked with the previous shows and incorporated it here. The cast is memorable, everyone feels genuine and down to earth. It's not a show that is over the top with the special effects or fight choreography. Instead, it focuses on the stories and characters, such as, with my interpretation, a story of the past, present and future. While they live in the present, they are always reminiscing of the past and the secrets that some may hold from others, such as Arc keeping a secret from Yuma, or Yuma keeping secrets from everyone else, mostly because of a fear of holding back people's potentials, with Yuma hiding his past of losing his parents, as it was something that had personally affected him, and not wanting to let it hold him back, as others may feel sorry for him for his loss, which could be seen, in my opinion, as something that could be holding him back as a person, and not wanting to share of his past means that he doesn't want others to be burdened by his losses, and Arc keeping a secret from Yuma, as he didn't want want Yuma worried about a threat that could be devastating and may demotivate Yuma from using his imagination and his full potential. I feel like it's a show that currently stands out from the rest, as there is still currently a story that is left to tell of the future, as the past has been uncovered and they are living in the present, but the future of a new existential threat still holds, which gives the show more of a meaning and a purpose, as there is something to look forward to that makes the characters memorable as it challenges their beliefs and pushes their personalities to be better than before and develop as a person in the show. So looking back at it overall, does New Generation Ultraman still suck? No, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, New Generation Ultraman from the start of Ginga has paved the way for where the series is at today. In my personal opinions, it has its ups and downs. A generation that isn't perfect, but one that is experimental with many things. The introduction of the emphasis of more toys and each series being restricted to only 25 episodes are some examples that I can give. A generation that takes a new path from the previous, and one that is adapting to a modern audience that may or may not have grown up with the previous Ultra shows, but it is definitely an audience that has more exposure to a mainstream catalog of entertainment. I think this generation has punched above its weight, starting with limited resources and low usage of visual effects to what it has become now, a series that has overtaken Super Sentai in sales and has made a massive impact and contribution to the sales data of Bandai Namco. Although my preference for story and character is my priority, it has still made many great improvements between each series, as there are still moments in the show where you can look back on and reminisce the moments that stood out from the show. Despite the amount of toys that are marketed, there are still some things to remember. And of course, this generation may not be as iconic as the previous, but this generation has done well to keep the franchise of Ultraman alive. Each show within this generation has showcased something that is memorable for many people, no matter how bad or how great it's portrayed. Each show is memorable in their own ways, and that's something to still be grateful for in this new generation era of Ultraman. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.